Today's VGC competitive overview is about Mudsdale. So Mudsdale's a mono ground type, which ground being one of the more offensive typings. This has 5 super effectives. And while poison is maybe not the most popular typing, so having super effective on that's not a big deal, fire's pretty common, especially as a defensive terra type, and steel's also reasonably common, so having super effectives on that can be quite good. Bug and grass, of course, resist ground, and flying is just straight up immune to it. But defensively, ground is actually pretty good. We only have 3 weaknesses: water, grass, ice. It does resist poison and rock, which resisting rock slides is always nice, and is also immune to electric. So for a monotyping, this is actually pretty okay. There's a decent spread of super effectives to work with, combined with only 3 typings you're weak to. So really not bad. Definitely one of the more usable monotypings out there. Now, as for abilities, we have some interesting options here. The first one is Own Tempo, which prevents confusion and also blocks Intimidate, which I have seen this ability used for setting up Swagger. You use Swagger onto Mudsdale to essentially get 2 stages up of attack for free, which is quite nice to have. And blocking Intimidate means you're not going to lower it with Intimidate. You have to use other means. So good option here. Stamina is funny, because every time this thing is hit, the defense stat goes up. I've seen this used with Beat Up before, where you just buff in that stat with your support Pokemon, and then you just keep clicking body press until your opponent goes away. But the hidden ability is Inner Focus, which prevents flinching and prevents Intimidate from dropping your stats as well. All of these abilities are good in their own way, and depending on how your team is set up, either one of these will work. I know when I was testing Mudsdale on this format, I was leaning more towards Inner Focus, just to block, flinch, and intimidate. Worked really well with the Mudsdale I was going for in experimentation. Now, if we look at the stats, it's really not that bad. This is a slow Pokemon, so 35 base speed. I don't even need to show you how that stacks up. That's just slow. Good Trick Room option, but it is faster than Torkoal, so keep that in mind. The defensive stats are actually pretty decent as well. We have 100 on both HP and defense with 85 special defense, so a little less special bulk. Also, the special attack is bad, so you would most likely never use a special attack on this. The physical attack happens to be the highest stat at 125 base, which if you look at the stat distribution, it's actually very similar to Tinglu, and I want to show you just how similar. Here is Mudsdale's stats right here, and we're going to run essentially the same EVs as this Tinglu here. Curiously, the attack stat on Tinglu is actually lower, so Mudsdale is technically more offensive, but Tinglu has considerably higher bulk and an ability that gives it good special bulk as well. Which is why when we look at the actual damage these can do into each other, Tinglu does win out slightly because of its much higher bulk. But that higher offense gives you a guaranteed 1-hit KO onto Fluttermane with high horsepower. So there's kind of a trade-off there where you could use Mudsdale as an alternate to Tinglu as a more consistent offensive option. So this is one of the handful of Pokemon that get access to high horsepower in Gen 9. It got taken off so many things in this game, which gives Mudsdale some of the best single target ground type offense in the game, because the other option is Stomping Tantrum, which actually will do the same damage as Earthquake because of how doubles calculates spread moves. So for Mudsdale specifically, you would most likely be running high horsepower. But this does also get access to Earthquake if you want a spread ground type move as well. You already saw Close Combat earlier. It does also get Superpower, and there's, of course, Heavy Slam. A couple other neat offensive options. We do have access to Iron Head and Body Press, as well as Rock Slide. All great choices. There's Fissure if you want to get funny. And this does also get Double Edge, which is an interesting option. I forgot to mention Stone Edge. That's a pretty decent choice if you are willing to play around that low accuracy. Now, for status and supportive moves, we have Iron Defense, which synergizes well. Body Press, Stealth Rock if you want to lay traps, but that's more of a singles thing than VGC. This does get like Sunny Day and Sandstorm, which I find kind of interesting. I've never seen Sunny Day and Sandstorm used on Mudsdale. It's probably a reason why. This does get Mud Slap and Mud Shot, so it can actually speed control or lower accuracy. Scary Face is another speed control option, which again, I haven't seen people use that on Mudsdale because Mudsdale's slow. Lowering speed doesn't really help you there. This does also get Counter, which I know is sort of an offensive option, but it's a really weird one. And Mudsdale specifically does not get a lot of benefit from it, I don't think. And this does also get Roar to cycle out your opponent's Pokemon. So this Pokemon doesn't have like the biggest supportive set, actually quite small, and it has all the good ground moves you could want, as well as some decent coverage. But what do you actually do with this thing? Mudsdale's not seeing a lot of use right now, and it probably will see even less use once Rank Ladder moves over to Regulation D. And that's probably because, for the most part, Tinglu is a better choice at playing Mudsdale's role of physical ground type offense. Because Tinglu has the sustainability to keep throwing out hits for much longer than Mudsdale, and Tinglu having better supportive options gives it a little bit more flexibility to work with. But Mudsdale does actually have better abilities for consistent offense, because Inner Focus, preventing flinch and fake out, is kind of a big deal, especially on a turn 1 where your opponent's really relying on an Intimidate and fake out to disrupt and set up their game. Mudsdale can ignore that completely, and with its higher offensive stat than Tinglu, threatens a pretty powerful Earthquake that both Intimidate and Fake Out will not be able to slow down. It's options like that Mudsdale has access to that, when positioned correctly, can give it a really good shot at getting a lot of offense off very quickly. It is, however, quite slow, so it has to be able to survive a hit before it can get its hit off, especially on a turn 1. But Mudsdale has a decent amount of bulk to be able to do that outside of, say, a hyper offense lead, but a hyper offense lead is not going to have Intimidate or Fake Out at the ready. So the offense is pretty consistent, and it's ground type offense. That's just good in general. But Regulation D is on its way, and with that comes Ursaluna. And Ursaluna is brutal. A Guts Flame Orb version just does so much damage that Intimidate doesn't matter. Like, it is going to still do more damage through an Intimidate than Mudsdale could ever hope to do because of how big of a buff Guts is. And Ursaluna being immune to the debuff from Burn, in a way, gives it more consistent offense than Mudsdale. Plus, it gets access to Headlong Rush, which is an absolutely brutal move. Plus Stab Facade, which does insane amounts of damage. So when Regulation D hits, the Inner Focus variant is not actually going to be as strong, though I think in the current regulation, Inner Focus is probably the best option to go for, just because it's a lot harder to set up the Stamina variant. The only way to outpace something like Ursaluna is to run the Stamina variant, and hope you don't get crit, because that crit's going to one-hit you. Because then you can start tearing apart an Ursaluna with Body Press after you get several buffs up from Stamina. So a Mudsdale of Mousehold could actually be quite effective at dealing with a physically offensive Trick Room team, for example. So there's options available for Mudsdale, and there still will be when Regulation D happens, but Mudsdale's more of a counter pick than a primary pick for offense. Because even though the Inner Focus variant is pretty offensive, it will soon be outpaced in the new format. That being said, I still think it's a pretty good choice. It's somewhere in like maybe the low B, high C tier area where it is pretty good, but it's not doing anything unreasonably strong, which is probably going to keep it from seeing much utilization. Like, it already has very low utilization, but it's really okay when you set it up in a team that plays well with it, but also is not absolutely relying on it to win. That's kind of the thing. In an Ursaluna Trick Room team, you're kind of relying on Ursaluna's offense, and rightfully so. It does stupid amounts of offense. Trying to rely on Mudsdale for Trick Room offense is not going to be nearly as consistent, so you really have to use it as a counter pick for very specific scenarios. Then you will get the full utility out of Mudsdale. So not meta defining, somewhere in counter pick territory, but definitely usable. Anyway, if you'd like to see me cover another Pokemon that's maybe under the radar, or one that's not in the game yet for like competitive speculation, let me know down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, you know where the algorithm buttons are, the subscribes and all that. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see y'all next time.